All right, so we are live. Thank you so much for joining me, Ryan. We're just, let me get my screen set up again here. There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's installment of Succession Matters, a platform by which we hope to shed light on the various topics of succession by speaking with professionals from all walks. My name is Chelsea Lees. I'll be acting as your host, and today we are focusing on the barriers to finding financing when buying a business. For those of you who are not familiar with succession matching, we are a two-sided marketplace for matching business sellers with buyers and much more. Today we have with us Reynard from the Community Futures, Northwestern Ontario. Ryan was born and raised in the city of Kenora, and he attended the Colorado College, earning a bachelor's degree in economics while playing Division I hockey for the Tigers. While working on the high-tech industry in Colorado, he also earned his MBA in global management. He returned to Canada in 2001, working for Weyerhaeuser as a finance superintendent. Ryan then joined the Community Futures family in 2006 as the executive director of the Lake of the Woods Business Incentive Corporation. He has helped stabilize the corporation and grow the lending portfolio from 3.5 million to just over 11 million. No small feat, I'm sure. Ryan has been the chair of the Northwestern Ontario Regional Community Futures since 2014 and was elected there by his peers. And he has a passion for helping entrepreneurs and small business owners reach their dreams. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think a great place for us to start would be, what is a Community Futures office, or what is Community Futures, if you could shed a little light there?
Yeah, for sure. So again, thank you, Chelsea, for the opportunity to speak today. So Community Future Development Corporations, there's 267 across Canada. They're not-for-profit community development corporations, and they're there to provide small business services to people living in rural or remote communities. Each CFDC, as they're commonly referred to, they offer small business loans, consulting, training for those that want to start, expand, franchise, buy, or even sell a business. So the Community Futures offices, they have a national website, so Community Futures Canada. And if you want, you can log on to that website and you can find your local CFDC office. Now, the CFDCs are governed by volunteer board of directors, and they typically are a relatively good cross-section of the local business community. CFDCs understand business in rural Canada because we live and work there. So we understand the challenges that small businesses face in those rural and remote communities. So one of the primary functions of a CFDC office is to provide business counseling and lending services. Now that can be to existing business owners, it can be to entrepreneurs, someone looking to start a business. So, one of your first stops should be the Community Future Development Corporation office if you're looking at purchasing, selling, or starting a business. Typically, we will do 10-year term loans. That's our maximum. And we also provide another loan guarantee product. So if you need a line of credit, we can help secure that with the traditional financiers. So loan guarantees typically run around a 5-year maximum. So the CFDCs, again, we take traditionally a little bit higher risk. So startups are often viewed as, higher risk, but we do look at all of the startups. Not everybody obviously is approved, but we do take a very close look. And because we take such high risk, we are often a bit higher on the interest rates. So we, because we are federally funded, so we're funded by the federal government of Canada, we are not there to compete with the banks. So we are there to work in partnership with them. So that's why, again, we will have a slightly higher interest rate than the traditional financiers.
Right. So what we've come to talk to today, and you've already touched on this a little bit in terms of like what you do in terms of lending. So it's no surprise that the number one barrier to buying a business is really finding financing. And I think a lot of business owners that we interact with, maybe that fact can be lost on them because they think, oh, that's the buyer's thing to worry about. Not necessarily, I'm just trying to sell my business. They need to find the financing. They'll come to the table with the money. When in fact, it's something that everybody needs to think about and consider, because if the buyer can't find the financing, there's no way that they can buy the business, right? So maybe you could enlighten us a little bit in terms of exactly what it is you guys look for when somebody comes to you and is wanting to buy a business. What do they need to present to you that will help you to give them that loan, give them that money that they're looking for?
Sure. So some of that is coming to us looking to purchase an existing business. Often, if they're prepared, it makes the process much easier, obviously. So some of the little tips, are there financial statements available for your review? And then, you need to ask the business, why are you selling? Obviously, there's probably a good reason, but these are questions that you need to ask. Also, what is the legal status of the business? Are you looking to finance the entire amount? Are you looking for a vendor take back? Are you familiar with the industry? So there's lots and lots of questions that businesses will have when they come to us.
Right.
Sorry, when buyers have, when they come to us.
When they come to you. Yeah, exactly. But inevitably those questions sort of trickle to the seller as well, because they need to come up with like the books, right? And I know that's a sticking point for a lot of our business owners, for sure, is having the books ready. What would you recommend individuals do, business owners do, so that they can have their books in the best possible shape to share with the buyer, to share with you in order to secure that financing?
Sure. Well, work with your local accountants. So you need to go see a bookkeeper, have someone help you if you're not that familiar with bookkeeping. So you need to have a reasonable and accurate picture of the health of the business. Banks and other lending institutions are not going to be overly excited about providing financing if there aren't some reasonable financial statements in place. So again, as the seller, you need to make sure that you have, your ducks in a row. You want to have your financial statements ready. You want to have any other questions or concerns. Another thing that a seller may want to consider as well is, are they prepared to take a vendor take back? So sometimes a buyer may not be able to finance the entire amount of the business. So in that particular case, they may ask the seller, would you take a percentage vendor take back? So what that means is that the seller would hold, essentially they would loan the buyer a portion of the selling price, and then the buyer would pay it back over time. So essentially they're providing some of the financing as well.
Right. How, to your experience, how often do you see a vendor take back situation?
We probably see it, and again, every community future development office is different because, of the geography and the makeup of their board, et cetera, their communities. But typically we may see it 20% of the time, 25% of the time. It just depends on what they're asking. So what are they valuing their business at? What are the lenders in that community prepared to do? How much are they willing to look at? And again, how much owner's equity can the buyer put in? How much of their own personal money can they put in? So again, there's multiple factors that go into kind of making a deal. But again, it's oftentimes the CFTC will provide a little bit of guidance and advice to both the buyer and seller on how can we make this deal work if it works, if it's reasonable and works for everybody. How do we put the pieces together to make sure that it's a good fit?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I'd like to touch a little bit on goodwill, if you will. Often business owners, as they're selling their business, depending on the business, of course, and the individual, but sometimes they'll place a lot of weight into the goodwill that they feel that they have with the business. And I think most banks, like traditional financing through banks, won't lend to the cost of goodwill, right? So do you approach that any differently within community futures, or have any recommendations surrounding the value of goodwill?
Yeah, so goodwill is a bit tricky. Again, it's tough to really put a a value on it. But again, that's where the community futures corporations come into play, because we live in those communities, right? So we understand that business A has a reputation of, you know, XXX. So we can provide a reasonable value of goodwill to a loan. So again, taking the higher risk that we normally will look at, we will take goodwill as a valuation into consideration. Now, business valuation in general is something that both the buyer and seller need to look at. So as a buyer, if I'm coming in looking at a business, I need to see what other businesses are comparable so that I can get an idea of how much that business is worth. You know, the seller may say, I think my business is worth this, and the name up there is, you know, worth this much goodwill. Well, that's great. Maybe it was, but there's, you know, times change, right? So the external environment, the economy may be changing, interest rates, you know, all of what we've seen with COVID, things like that. So the CFTC will look at goodwill, and we will be able to provide a reasonable valuation of it. So we will look at those, and we do consider that in our funding models.
Oh, that's nice to know. For those businesses who are leaning heavily on the goodwill piece. Yeah,
they're tricky. They're tricky for sure.
It's tricky. Yeah, exactly. And definitely like individual basis, there's probably not one blanket thing across the board. You mentioned COVID, and I mean, that's obviously a topic we're all just so sick of hearing about these days. But we work with a lot of business owners who too are like really saw shifts in their business over the couple of years that, you know, like they had to maybe lock down and open back up again, and it changed their revenue substantially. And so there seems to be a feeling of sort of scrambling to like, how do I prove the value of my business? What it was maybe before COVID, what it is, you know, was during that time frame that all the books are looking a little weird, and then how it's settling out now, if, you know, things are sort of returning back to normal, if you can call it that. Do you take that period into different consideration than other periods? Like how exactly does Community Futures look at the books when it comes to lending?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So COVID obviously put the world in a tailspin. It changed everybody's lives. We understand that. We take that into consideration when we're looking at prior financials. If someone, you know, has the last couple of years financials, obviously they're not, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, they're not going to be as healthy as they were pre-COVID. So we do take that into consideration. We'll look at other factors in terms of, you know, has that business made adjustments? Have they modified their operations to be able to adapt and go forward in a different manner? And another reason, again, to I'm going to tell the CF program, but another reason to go and talk to your CF office is during COVID, we were able to offer grants on, you know, they're small grants, but we were able to offer them to businesses that were facing challenges because of COVID and wanted to modify their operations. So potentially there was business A, and they didn't have a digital website. They weren't doing digital, you know, economy. So we can provide, and we did many times, a little bit of grant money to help them provide or hire a consultant that was able to, you know, put a website together where they could do some e-commerce or maybe some digital marketing. So looking into, you know, ways to find new markets outside of your individual community, because when we were in lockdown, obviously, you know, it was tough for people to move in. So you had to look at, you know, other markets. So again, that was just one of the things that we were able to provide to businesses to help them adapt and hopefully, you know, adjust their operations to be able to deal with future COVID type events.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I didn't realize that you guys were doing that. That really helped some businesses pivot, I'm assuming, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So from the time that somebody, if we were to just like throw ourselves into a business succession situation, right? Buyer engages with a business owner, a business that they're hoping to acquire. And they sort of like, you know, go through the process of due diligence, look at everything, and then then are free to look for financing. What sort of timeline can they hope for from that? Like, hey, I need a loan to I'm actually getting the loan, in my bank. Like, what does that process look like and how long?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that we would suggest to someone that's looking to buy a business, to have at the start of their process. So look into your different financing options rather than last minute, you kind of put a deal together and then you're scrambling, trying to find the financing pieces, right? So do a little bit of homework up front and find what solutions might be there for you. But in a just a generic situation, and again, each Community Future Development Corporation is run independently, so we don't all do the same way, but typically it's a monthly board meeting. The Community Future, some of them, such as our office, the staff have the ability to approve loans up to a certain amount. Above that, they will go to the board. So if you've got all of the documentation that is needed for a loan application, it can be anywhere from 3 days to 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the next board meeting or the complexity of the deal itself. But it can be very quick. We can go from a couple of days to a couple of weeks.
Wow. And what are the common stumbling blocks that would hold up that process? What would make it longer, halt it?
Sure. Yeah. Oftentimes it's just incomplete information. So if we're missing, let's say the past financials from the business, or we don't have your cash flow projections on what you're assuming you're going to be making in the business, those can slow things up. If there's questions on, are there any issues with the property, environmental issues that we may need to look at? So all things that, a purchaser can do in advance to be fully prepared when they come to us and say, okay, here's my complete application. And again, we work with clients all through the process. So someone can come to us right from concept. I'm thinking of buying business A in my community. What do I do? So then our lending officers will sit down with them and they'll explain the process. They'll say how long it's going to take generally, and then what the client needs to do. So what are the next steps? Putting a bit of a business plan together, some cash flow projections, sitting down with the business owner, understanding the business owner's timeline. What are they looking at in terms of selling? There's also things like valuation that have to be taken into consideration. All those good things. What is your target market? Are you looking at changing the operation from the existing owner, the way they're operating it? So there's lots of things to take into consideration. But again, our all the CFDCs have lending officers, and they will be more than happy to sit down and kind of help guide you through the process.
That's really cool and helpful. You mentioned valuation. How much do you guys lean on like a third party valuation?
Well, again, because the CFDCs live and work in those communities, we typically will have a reasonable understanding of business valuation to begin with. So again, depending on the size of the deal, we don't often ask for a commercial business valuation because they are expensive, but we may ask for an opinion of value in terms of maybe a real estate or a resort or things like that. But again, because we have professionals that live and work in those communities, we do have a reasonable understanding of the business valuation.
That goes a long way, I'm sure. Yeah. So maybe like you mentioned in the beginning, sort of when you were talking about Community Futures is working alongside banks. I know there's lots of different ways that one can structure how they get their financing for buying a business. And so like sometimes it's like a little bit from a bank, some of it's non-traditional lending, like Community Futures, and some of it's vendor financing, as we talked about before, and some of it sometimes just like having their own cash on hand to purchase the business, or they need a little bit of skin in the game in order to embark on some other financing. Can you maybe walk me through how those different mashups come together and how they look. Like, do you start with community futures and then go to a bank? You start with what you have in your pocket and then go to community futures? Like, everybody I'm sure is going to be very different, but how would you recommend even just approaching it? It might feel very daunting for a lot of business owners and buyers to consider all the different factors.
Yeah, no doubt. So again, my suggestion, and it's go see your CFTC office, make that your first stop. We've had clients come in, we'll help them, kind of put a bit of a business plan together or get some direction, send them off to a traditional lender, and they don't come back to us, which is fine. That's part of our mandate as well. But what we look for is sitting down in partnership with the banks. Could be other provincial lending programs, could be federal lending programs. So typically your community future development office is plugged into other things that are going on out there. So we know of other programs, and we will help direct you in the proper manner. So, but oftentimes I've sat down at the table with in our community. So we've got different banks, we've got the BDC, we've got credit unions. So we can have one or two, at the same table, and we'll chat about how do we make this deal work? What's in the best interest of the client? And, typically the community futures office in a partnership deal, if we are, a secondary lender, we will take a subsidiary security position. So we will often take a second position or a third position, depending on, the structure of the deal. But again, our focus is how do we make this work? How do we make it work for the client so that they have every opportunity to succeed? I think that's genuinely the feeling you should get when you go see any CFTC office, because again, we are federally funded, and that is our mandate, to create jobs, to help people, start their business, buy their business, and improve our local economies.
Right. And so touching on that a little bit more, being that you work within your communities and know those communities, succession and succession planning are instrumental in maybe allowing the economic health of communities to continue. How do you feel, how important do you feel that succession is? Because like you said, you also fund startups, but those are much riskier than buying a business per se. Like, how pro succession are you, or anti? I guess would be that.
No, for sure. We definitely fund succession businesses. So oftentimes, like you said, a startup, there's a lot of risk with it, right? There's a lot of unknowns. But if you're purchasing an existing business, you've got the history there, you've got clientele. So there's a big difference in terms of purchasing an existing business. And we will work with clients. We do all the time, and we're very happy to assist the sellers as well. We direct them to your program, succession matching, where they can look at different avenues and understanding the process itself, right? Succession doesn't happen overnight. Selling your business typically doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. So it's working with both the buyers and sellers, helping them understand what the process is. And again, we 100% will look at funding existing, purchase of existing businesses.
Right. Do you see a lot of businesses close their doors because they can't embark upon the succession journey, if you will?
Well, unfortunately, we do see that occasionally, and that's part of the the challenge that we face is and we saw it a little bit through COVID too, where people just started to not get fed up, but just hit the point where COVID made people realize we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? So some people said, you know what, I don't really want to continue to operate this business, or I want to sell this business, etc. So we have seen the occasional business close, and in rural communities, the loss of a service is significant. If you've got one appliance repair shop or one grocery store in your community, you don't want to see that community lose that service, right? Yeah. So succession is extremely important. And again, this is a project that the CFs in my area are looking at, is being able to educate the business community on what is the process, what are the options for being able to sell your business, and just making sure that people are prepared and educated. That's key.
Yeah, and that's the big struggle, right? Is having those resources available to the community so that they can find that. Yeah, and you're familiar with our formal succession planning program, I'm sure, right? Yeah. Helping business owners to build out a formal succession plan. How far does the succession plan reach when it comes to finding financing if a seller has a formal succession plan in place? Does that help in any way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shows the preparedness, and it oftentimes will have a lot of information in it that we need, so that we will look at. So we like to see that. We like to see a succession plan. It also shows that the dedication of the seller. They know what they want. They're looking at making sure that they get the equity in the business that they put together, right? So a lot of times, especially in smaller communities, that's their retirement, right? They put that business together, and they're looking at, that's my retirement fund. So you don't want to see them close the doors, because what happens to them then? Not only are you losing that service in the community, but that individual or those individuals are losing, kind of that retirement piece.
Right. Yeah, totally. So it really is just like everybody needs to be prepared, all hands on deck, not just the buyer to get the financing. Like the preparedness of the seller makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to be prepared. We don't know what tomorrow's, going to bring. So if you're getting to the point where you're starting to think about selling your business, talk to the professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a beautiful high note to end on. Especially because your little rabbit is popping up over your shoulder there and wants to be a part of it. I'd love to hear what he says, but maybe that's a different episode. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I just appreciate the time. And again, I would highly suggest that anyone that's looking to buy or sell, go see your local CFTC office and chat with the professionals there. We're more than anxious to get you going.
For sure. And I'll definitely link your contact and the CF website as well in the show notes for anybody.
Very good.
Take care. Thank you so much, Ryan.